Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Doctor Will See You Now. Warm welcome to anybody new that is joining us, and thanks to our subscribers who are back for a rather summer special slice of a consultation. I have to say, when this book landed with me, the chance to be carried away to tropical climes was just what was needed. And then I started to read and I thought, maybe not under these circumstances. But anyway, let me welcome back into the consultation William Shaw. Hello, William, how are you?
I'm very, very well. And yes, it's nice to be in the real summer, because this was written in grayer weather, imagining being in sunny places.
So the novel that we're going to discuss is a little bit of a move away from anybody who's familiar with your work. You've brought us something new. The novel, and I got a proof copy. Do you have the brilliant? So you've got the title there, Dead Rich, and I've got then the strapline, Paradise Can Be Murder, and how. So I have so many questions to ask you about this, because you are such an established author. You appear on long lists and short lists, and you're one of those pillars in the crime writing community, without a doubt, with the various activities that you've been involved in. And then you come outside the series with the ILX Wikipedia that we adore and that we're used to, and you do a wee little name change. I'm not sure whether it's to protect the innocent, but you wrote Dead Rich under the name of G.W. Shaw.
Yeah.
So, please, first of all, writing a thriller as opposed to a police procedural, that little name change, and I love what's on the back of mine, because I do agree with it. So published by Riverrun, and it was heralded as Riverrun's lead thriller for 2022. And I have to say, it's one of those books that just, those pages turn, and the heat of the location and the danger that people find themselves in. Yeah, I think that is a very fair claim for this novel. So please, I'll sit back, we'll all get cozy as you tell us about the transformation of William Shaw. All yours.
So as Jackie said, Dead Rich is kind of, it's a thriller set on a super yacht in the Caribbean, which is a little bit away from my normal police procedural set in rainy Dungeness. Slightly different media. But what was happening is I started writing and started being published about 10 years ago. And about 10 years ago, there was this big sea change going on in fiction. And a lot of writers came through with what became labeled as psychological fiction. And actually what I saw in that was a lot of writers writing what they'd love to read, the stuff they loved to read when they were younger. In that, they were very often writing like locked room thrillers about families, much in the way that some of the great golden age writing was done. And they kind of reinvented it in a new way for the new times. And you could see publishers at the beginning first thinking, what is this? We don't know what it is, but it was successful and readers really wanted it. And it's suddenly, then it's dominated the last decade in writing. And so many of my colleagues are actually people who are really erudite about that kind of writing, because they read those books to death as children. And I was thinking, what did I read when I was a child? And I read sort of Neville Shute, Hammond Innes, Alistair MacLean, all those 70s thrillers. And so I thought, oh, and then I looked around and I thought, actually, it's quite weird, but just as like 10, 15 years ago, nobody was writing those locked room psychological thrillers, nobody's now writing the sort of high-end foreign location where it's a travel book, really. I mean, like the great thrillers that I read when I was a teenage boy took you to places that were, they took you to a desert or to the Antarctic, or they took you to Africa or some European city. They took you out of yourself. Now, I don't know if you remember, but the last 2 years we've been stuck at home.
Oh, yes.
And I kind of thought, I was thinking, maybe we all want to be somewhere else. And I started writing this book and nobody had asked for it. My publishers hadn't asked for it. And I began playing with the idea of writing one book in the morning and one in the afternoon, just to see whether I could do something else. So I was writing this book at the same time as I was writing, really at the same time as I was writing a book called The Trawlerman, which is my paperback out now.
Yeah.
And it was just a really nice experiment to see whether I could play with another form. And it's really, really my homage to those sort of very romantic. I love Neville Shute. There are kind of romantic books in which people do heroic things in romantic places and there's a romantic element. I just thought, can I play with that? And is there a space for it? And then I took it along to my agent. She said, this is quite interesting. I'm not sure it's a William Shaw book. Let's call it a G.W. Shaw book. Well, she said, what do you want to be called? And I said, well, my initials are G.W. Shaw. I was actually christened George William. So I'm being G.W. Shaw for this. And I just thought this will be something different. I don't want to stop doing police procedurals because I love them to death.
Okay,
but,
that's yeah.
But I want to have a stab at something else.
So thank you for opening up this new chapter, as it were, in your writing. And you mentioned how you set yourself this thing of a book in the morning and a book in the afternoon. I mean, obviously the production and the quality says it worked for you, but what was that experience like? I mean, was it a difficult wrangle, or could you shift heads quite easily?
Amazingly easy. I actually think, one of the best things to learn as a writer is to know how your brain works. And I have no guilt about spending half my time on social media checking up to what Dr. Noir's latest tweets are. I'm really happy like that. I'm completely easily distracted, and I keep the other thing ticking over. And in fact, I think distraction helps me, because I think if I'm sitting at a screen just being that, I actually become a bit boring and I begin to dislike what I do. So I quite like writing in, like half an hour and I go completely mad, and then I go away and I start to see what's going on in my socials. Yeah. And so I think I can do the same thing in the book. I think I've got a very low concentration span, but don't beat myself up about it, because I've learnt that's all right. That's the way I work. So, because I think some people feel very guilty if they haven't written every hour of the day. And actually, I think I've just come to be, as I'm older, that's the way I work. I still produce books. It's fine.
Quite. And is it not? I mean, I so enjoy talking to each and every author who makes their way here, because everybody is unique. Everybody's style, everybody's process, everybody's, either they have a very strict timetable or not. And I think the message that comes out clear is, do you, as an author, find what works? Because, I know in academic writing, there is nothing worse, for me anyway, to sit and look at a screen and say, I must sit here until something happens. And sometimes it's a question of, yes, here's something, here it comes, but there's nothing more. So I'll go and do something else, because then it's time better spent than trying to force something that is not.
Absolutely. And neurologically, brains are weird. They quite often work somewhere in the background. There's a background task, as they said, going on. And actually that can be solving huge problems. So I found doing one and the other actually increased my work rate, but didn't increase my stress.
Great. Thank you. I think those words of encouragement for others out there, who, as you say, it's easy to beat ourselves up if we're not behaving like, one of the big names that we've heard that they work like this.
Or even the book, or even the courses tell you maybe you've got to write 1,000 words a day or something like that. Yeah. The number of days in which I write 1,000 words a day are pretty slim.
That's not an excuse, though, for those of you who are working on a book. So, Dead Rich came into being. I've got questions about various aspects of it. And of course, the first one is writing the thriller. And you chose, I love the reason behind it, because of that earlier reading. And it certainly was a read that transported you elsewhere, and it really needed that. But of all the islands in all those tropical locations, you chose the Virgin Islands.
Yes.
Are you familiar with them, or was this for you a chance to go elsewhere?
No, and I wasn't, and I think you have to be very careful when doing this, and I hope I don't get anybody who I offend by writing somewhere I don't know well. This was written at a time when I couldn't go there. I would love to have had the excuse to go there and say it was research and claim it's tax deductible. but at the time I could go nowhere. So I was going places in my head, which is also very good for you because it's lovely traveling but in your imagination. So yeah, and a lot of it's done at sea. So you know, a lot of it is you know, at sea between the Virgin. And so I was reading a lot of stuff about people who've sailed around there, which is also fun. But yeah, it's it was kind of, you've got to pick a location where you want a millionaire or billionaire even. I thought there's a few around there.
Yeah, definitely. I have to say, I was lucky enough to have a wee trip to St. Thomas, to the Virgin Islands, but I was quite poorly, so it was nice to go somewhere. You say it's that idea you can travel, and you can travel really safely. And you don't have to worry about passport control, and you don't have to worry about turbulence.
The bugs don't bite
exactly. So it was lovely to go back and reclaim that spot. It really was. And of course, you began writing this before, you know, as we're speaking today. Sadly, that conflict rages on in Ukraine. But the whole idea of a Russian oligarch boat, that probably if you were writing it now, it wouldn't be going anywhere.
No, exactly. I've been reading this book here actually, by Anders Östlund, who's actually currently in Kyiv, and he's somebody who's written a lot about the Russian regime. And I was thinking, you know, there's been several assassination attempts and successful assassinations in the UK, and I'm not the only person to be thinking about that. And it kind of mixed with this idea of a super yacht, because a few years ago I had heard this thing from several years ago now. I'd heard this thing from the boat show, where one of the boat designers was saying these billionaires, they keep saying they want more and more electronic gadgetry on their yachts, and one day they're going to come a cropper because they're making them really hackable. I thought, that's a great idea. Somebody's going to write a brilliant thriller about that. And then I waited and waited, and it never happened. So I thought, maybe I'll do that. But you know, what is going on with that was, I was thought, well, you know, I chose a Russian oligarch, and then it was about an assassination attempt on a Russian oligarch. Now there are several of these going on, and several, you know, in the last few months there have been several more attempts.
Yes.
And I think, you know, it's not like it's prescience. This, I think, when you're trying to convince people of horror and tension, you're looking at the real world and you're trying to think which of the areas I can convince you about could happen. And so I was writing into this because it's plausible. That's the terrible thing. It's plausible. And then, of course, just as I was finishing it up and we're handing in the proofs, the worst thing happens. And suddenly all these oligarchs are being exposed and their yachts are being confiscated. And it was like this awkward thing, is like, how close do people want the reality to be? And, you know, that makes me slightly anxious, to be honest, because, you know, Putin's dragged us into a terrible world now, and so this is on the edges of that. So there is a kind of reality to it going on, and it's more plausible than I imagined in some ways, which is it's not a good thing.
It's interesting though, isn't it, that where the mind is and where creativity draws the author. And I was thinking, you know, the Russian oligarch in this, Stepan, how do we say it? Purimova?
Pirimov, Pirimova for his wife.
That's it, Pirimov, yeah. You know, and the idea of having you know, some kind of sympathy for somebody who is under attack, and yet thinking, you know, in different circumstances, would that sympathy be there? And feeling a little bit guilty about feeling sympathy towards a Russian oligarch at this moment in time, but of course you were writing in a different context.
Yeah, but also, I mean, you know, if these people were cartoon monsters, it'd be easy to spot who they were. You know, they don't think they're monsters. You know, they're just very, very, very rich.
Yeah. And again, and how is that wealth accrued? And what, with that wealth, what do people do with it as well? I think, you know, I think they're always interesting questions, and it's not, you know, it's not right to, you know, blanketly, I don't know, be judgmental about somebody if they have happened to be successful.
And it doesn't work in fiction, to be honest. you know, I mean, I think you have to see, you need, just on the functional thing, you need to at times be rooting for this person. You think, hold on, why am I rooting for this man?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Oh, I should, no. Okay, so there we are. We're headed to the Virgin Islands, to St. Thomas, and we're going to be inhabiting this luxury yacht. And you liken these floating spaces to castles.
Well, we are in an age of robber barons again, aren't we? It strikes that history is quite circular sometimes. And there are points in history when some people get all the winnings and then they build castles. And actually, I think super yachts in some ways like the modern castle, because modern castles obviously had a practical purpose, but they were also symbolic. And actually, super yachts like the symbolic side of that.
Yes.
They're the big bit on the hill that everybody can see and say, look at me. This is what I've done. This is what, if you're like me, this is what you get. You know, and it's kind of like they're the ultimate sort of weird status symbol, because outwardly they're huge and fantastic, but they're also ultra secret, like castles. You know, they're really defended. They have security on board. They have all sorts of guns and things on board generally, and so they're this strange world which you and I don't often get invited to.
And it was one of my questions that I was going to ask you. Have you been on board one?
Never. I haven't. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because normally I'm really a stickler for making sure that I've been to everything that I write. And I was thinking in this particular world, apart from I couldn't get to the Virgin Islands during the time of writing it, nobody's going to ask me to a proper super. I might get to quite a nice swanky yacht that's moored on the Thames, but I'd never get to one of these billionaires ones, because nobody does unless you're in that circle, really. And that actually is you can flip that and say, in that case, I can imagine anything, because they are these worlds in which anything could happen. There was a great, when I was looking at these yachts, I was trying to work out who has the swankiest yachts. There was a wonderful thing I kept hearing about, this gold-plated super yacht. And I was thinking, that's amazing. I want to see a photograph of this gold-plated, and I couldn't see photographs of it, but I kept finding articles, like in Business Insider would have this articles. The interesting thing is the yacht never existed. Somebody had invented it as a spoof, and it had made it onto all these lists about the greatest super yachts. But the thing is, it's plausible, because they're all done in secrecy anyway. When people sign contracts to build them, they sign non-disclosures. When people work on them, they sign non-disclosures. So it's kind of, the fantasy is plausible. You can kind of begin to invent anything, because these proper business journalists thought this gold-plated super yacht existed because it might well do. So I can make up stuff, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Because I was intrigued at the kind of research that, to know how these things function and what's available, and also the crewing of these vessels and how that works. But I did wonder, however you did your research, if there was a certain either gadget or facility on these vessels that totally fascinated you.
The one that I would really like is that, and there's several people have this, is they have huge swimming pools with glass bottoms and so the hull of the boat has a glass bottom, and they can swim looking down at whatever's beneath their sort of thing, which is incredibly insane, a glass bottom boat. But they have that sort of thing. But I quite like something like that. I also like the fact, when I had my Thunderbirds toys, you had Thunderbird, I can't remember which one, but one of the Thunderbirds lived inside one of the other Thunderbirds.
Yeah, was it not 2 and 4?
Thank you, you're so good. But they're like that, because quite often they have yachts. They have these what they call toy garages, and inside is another smaller yacht. And sometimes there's another little thing lives in the other one. And it's just like they design their most bizarre fantasies, and these things happen. I just love the idea, you press a button, the side opens and out comes a mini submarine. Because some of them have their own mini submarines as well. You can have anything you want. Wow. What would you have? I don't know.
I like the idea of the glass bottom, because I do, I am a bit, I do like a snorkel, and I love seeing the life underneath, life in the water. I think I would have the small cinema.
Yeah.
On board.
You can have a cinema as big as you like.
You see, I'm sort of like modest. I'll just have a small one. Anyway, so we've got our setting now. We know where we are. We know the kind of location, and I suppose it's a bit like a watery locked room, is it not? Yeah. Which again, that lovely essence, back to former times in the writing, which is great. But let's have a chat about the characters that you bring here. And of course, the premise of going to this location. We have Kai, a musician that's seen better days, shall we say?
He's approaching middle age. He's sort of like been a successful musician. Things aren't going to, but he's very entitled, and he expected the world to fall at his feet, and it has done up till now. And like the road's beginning to run out for him, and suddenly he gets invited on a super yacht. So he kind of thinks, oh, the road carries on. I'm still going to be hanging out with the groovy people. And therein lies his mistake, really.
Yes, yes, be careful what you wish for. I did like, though, with this character as well, I thought there was a sensitivity there of how, what the times that we've been through and what that's done to an industry,
Yes.
Regardless of where people were at in their career, to be able, to still function as that kind of creative, of course, hasn't been easy.
Just as there's a whole lot of debut writers who haven't made it out to where they should have been because of lockdown, because they didn't get the chance to go out and meet readers and do all the sort of stuff, and so their careers are much tougher than it was for me. Musicians, there's a lot of people whose careers have basically ended because 2 years without touring, that's it. That's people, that's, if you're not already big enough, people will begin to forget who you are, and the next generation comes in, and he's on that sort of thing. And I think it's been awful for anybody in performance, young actors trying to make it on the stage, all that sort of stuff like that have had a miserable time. We forget about that, how many of them have had to go, just abandon their dreams and go somewhere else
and do something. Because I mean, forgive me if I'm not right in saying this, but the publishing industry, to be able to, in whatever way, shape it is, books have still been making it, their way out to a public, have they not?
Yeah, definitely. But what's happened is, because you can't browse in bookshops and you can't do things like that, more books have sold by fewer writers. And actually, that's not to anybody's benefit in the end. And it's harder for those people to make it up, make it up the ladder over that time. Hopefully we'll be getting back to normal, but this whole idea that the publishing industry was booming, and I think it's true, the publishing industry was booming in that time, but it hasn't been a great time for a lot of writers.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because I think, those of us who, are on the other side of that glorious, literary, I don't know, what is it? Is it a puzzle? What, how do we get to find out what you're writing? How does the writing get out there? I just think it's one of those really interesting processes. And I totally agree with you. He is hoping now that all those people whose work emerged at that time now get that chance to, because there is nothing like where possible an event where people meet face to face, in real life, physically, for those connections to be made. And I think for authors as well to feel boosted.
I mean, I was thrilled to see Simon Mears' The Calm reach the charts last week, because her book had come out in lockdown, and I thought it was a really different book. And I think, that could have been one that got completely trampled. But I think the fact that it was a very different book, they were lucky. Worston's picked up on it and gave it a big push.
And gave it that,
but, there's lots of other people who are a different story. But, it's really tough for all those people who emerged at that time.
Yeah. So can I just say, if there's any of those authors that are watching who would like, a bit of a platform, please do get in touch, because, there's always a space in the consultation room. A bit like the Windmill Theatre, we never close. Well, unless it's been doing that exam marking, but that's by the by. So that's Kai, and Kai gets a chance to go and live the high life, but it has its consequences. And the reason why he goes out there is because of his current girlfriend, an art student, but she happens to be Russian.
And he has no idea, because she's trying to live it down, trying to live a normal life away from her family, and she doesn't drop into the conversation that her parents are billionaires. So he has no idea the girlfriend who invites him out there is actually the daughter of this major figure, both politically and financially, and she ends out with him. And it's a question of trying to work out with a character like that is how far away from the tree does the apple fall, really.
But I did like, and I think it sounded such, it chimed, saying, please will you come with me, because it's really difficult being with my family, and and I'd really welcome you being there. And I love how, I think that regardless of wealth or status, I think that is such a common thing.
Yeah, holiday with your parents. I mean, it could be a holiday in the caravan, couldn't it? But it's really
it could
not.
exactly. And I thought, yeah, there's really quality in this. So without giving too much away, because we do like to keep what needs to be kept secret, tell us about this oligarch and your creation of this character, how you perceived him and how you developed him.
Well, I think it's quite interesting. I think what the conundrum we're all thinking of at the moment is who actually rules Russia, because it's a simplistic thing to say that it's just Putin. And how does Putin enable his government? And he can't do it all on its own. You don't run dictatorships just as a dictator. Who do you co-opt in that? And he's very cleverly co-opted not just not really oligarchs. That's a slight misnomer. He's co-opted all these people who have a function financially within the state, and very often they're owning or running state industries or nationalized, privatized state industries. So he's classically out of that mold. And there's lots of examples. So you could read lots of biographies of people like that. And again, they're not all people, but they're not all necessarily bad people, but they're people with a lot of investment in Europe and America, and a lot of them live in London, and this person has had links to London. You've seen more recently, I think some of them have pulled back a bit from being involved in Britain. There's money here, but they're sort of have been trying just before this to show themselves to be more nationalist and more pro-Russian. So a lot of them have moved back. Well, not a lot of them, but this character I imagined was modelled on someone, and I better not say who it is, who has done that. He's then moved back to Russia and sort of said, no, I'm Russian, and got a bit more involved with the Orthodox Church, like some of the people around Putin have. And so I wanted to try and find an archetype that was not unrecognizable. And, Russians are very traditional families. So to have this daughter who's off in London being an art student is actually a bit of a running sore always, because they're actually quite, you tend to be quite dutiful to your parents. So when you get a child like that who's not, she's a bit of an ongoing family problem in that sort of Russian conservative society.
She poses to be a bit of a problem. That is definite. Now, again, I want to slip in, and we won't say who they are or how they get there, but you also have, are they called the GRU? What was the KGB? Yeah. So tell us about the GRU and the research that you did around that, and anything that you can give without any spoilers about the characters that you bring in.
Well, I'm not the world's biggest expert, but you've got, everybody's heard of the KGB, but they haven't heard of the GRU. But Stalin, I think, really, I don't know whether he invented the GRU, but basically he was a great one for creating two organizations that did the same thing and keeping them in competition with each other, so that each one was always paranoid. So the GRU has a very similar sort of state security function. And some of the people, I think, I might be wrong here, but if I remember rightly, the two officers who came to do the assassination here in the Skripal thing, I think they might have been GRU. I think they were. But either way, it's plausibly each. They both get all sorts of training, and so I kind of wanted the GRU agents in there, and so they're people who appear, and well, yeah, we can't say too much.
We can't, but they do find their way onto the boat. Do they not? They do.
They have to staff a boat. If the boat has not been used, as he's disengaged a bit from the West, the billionaire has not used his super yacht as much as he used to. So that when they're staffing it, there's only a very skeleton crew on board, only 2 people, in fact. So they have to hire a lot of staff, which is commonly done on their super yachts because they're lying around doing nothing for large parts of the year. And you get the agencies, and they have all these security vetted people, and they arrive. And suddenly you have a full complement of crew to take the boat out at short notice. But it does mean you're not quite sure who everybody is.
I mean, what I really loved about that was this, multinationality of people on board. I loved that.
But that's true of the whole industry, whether it's on, I think it's a really, multinational industry, because it's, you know, it's just an expertise that'll take you around the world. And obviously, you know, if you've got your certificates, you can travel anywhere. And I think a lot of the people are very drawn to that. And then, you know, you'll speak in English because that's one language used in it, but you know, whatever, you'll do whatever. And on those boats, the money's good on those boats.
Yeah, I got very romantic about the idea of, am I too old to go crewing? You know, I'm sure I could do the laundry on a vessel like this, but then it got really dangerous, and I thought, no, I think I'll stay at home. Maybe not. And then another character that we really should talk about is the first mate,
right?
Erin. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've done a bit of sailing because my brother's a bit of a keen sailor, and actually, one of the things that brought this book around is that, having seen that thing, he was sailing around the Mediterranean on a hired boat, and me and my partner were a crew. And when you go into ports and you see these super yachts wherever you go, and you know they're massive and things like that. But I kind of thought, what about the sailing side of it? And I was thinking, I'm a huge fan of that kind of Ellen MacArthur kind of you know, solo sailor. I think it's incredibly romantic, those people who take themselves off around the world, learn this incredible set of skills and physicality to be able to do this thing. You have to be able to do science calculations like that, to be able to work out what you're doing. You know, you have to be so knowledgeable to be safe, and yet it's a really physical job. And very few people get into that top class. And I was thinking, like everything, what if you're the person who hasn't made it to that top class? And you're kind of, just like the musicians, you were kind of thinking your dreams are kind of over. You wanted to be this person who did all this, and it's kind of slipping away from you. And she is crewing on super yachts because she wants to sail a proper boat. And she's massively, massively snobby about these super yachts, because you just press a button and they do everything. She wants to do bare boats,
where you actually get to grips with the elements. You
know, and that. And of course, as things go wrong, her skill set becomes more and more crucial and useful, because she is really the only one who can really get people out of the bad situation, because she has the basic skills. You know, there's a great sailor called Pip Hare now who just did the Vendée Globe last year, and I just think people like that are like brilliant. They're like gods to me, because they just it's them. They're thousands of miles away from anywhere against the elements, and those skill sets would be far too much of a coward to do. But I kind of wanted that heroism in it.
I got a real sense in this character. I was going to ask you, but I think this might be my answer already. That I think it felt like this was your favorite character that you developed.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that I've always wanted to write. I mean, I love nautical books, and they're a very small section of those sort of things, but those things where you have, I just really like reading those sort of adventure stories, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. I've always really liked them. So I wanted a character who could do that for me. And actually then I had to hand it to proper sailors who knew what I talk about, who then hold their head in their hands and cry and say, William, that couldn't happen. And you have to rewrite it. Yeah. And occasionally they say, well, that could happen. They're a mad thing to do. And I think, okay, well, mad things to do are
Mad's fine. Mad's fine, because this is fiction. So let's have some madness. I think that's fine. So again, you have sailed some, but you passed this, these details of the novel. You passed this to other people. Did you enjoy again that kind of work that goes on with, even though people said to you, really, that wouldn't happen? Did you still have fun working with them?
Oh God, I love it. It's just great. I mean, it is so. I mean, there's a scene where a boat has to do a very complicated pickup. And I know from my own experience, the first thing they tell you when you're on a sailing yacht at sea is like, don't fall aboard, because the chance of being able to pick up anybody from the sea are pretty slim. Just never, whatever you do, avoid falling overboard. It's really hard. And I made that happen, and I love it, because you're talking to experienced sailors who've had to do this at sea, and you talk about it and you say, and then you have to get the positions right. You have to tell them where the wind is, to do all the things to make them believe it. And I love that, because they know this stuff, you know. And I kind of believe you don't have to fully understand it as a reader. You just have to know it's true. You know, that I've got some details right, and therefore you will believe it, because I'm not expecting everybody to go along with it, but it was quite important to put that stuff in. I mean, like, there's a great thing. I write with, I'm in a writer's group. The other guy who writes in it is CJ Sampson.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
we've been doing this for years, and his last book, Tombland, he stopped writing for a while. And I said, Chris, why have you stopped? And he said, well, I'm researching sheep. And he needed to get the right sheep for post Henry VIII East Anglia, and he didn't know what the sheep looked like, and he stopped writing until he found somebody who could explain sheep farming in East Anglia. And then you read the book, there's one sentence describing a sheep in it, but you know it's right. And I'm a huge believer in that sort of stuff. You don't even question, oh, is that what they really look like? Because he's told you what they look like. He said it's small, about the size of a dog slightly, but you know, and I think that kind of accuracy about those sort of details allows you to believe in it. Of course, if you get them wrong, then you don't believe the whole book.
Yeah, but again, I think you know, this book, I think this book is to be believed without a doubt, because I think, you know, you get to the end of it feeling slightly seasick, I have to say, which was great. You know, there's enough beautiful watery menace here, but I also think it is a book, you know, and I joked earlier, but I do think it is a book that could set off dreams of possibility.
Oh,
well.
That's nice. That's really nice to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, and a feeling of no matter what life might have dealt you, it isn't necessarily the end. It isn't necessarily over. And I have to say again at the end, I loved the humour. There's a conversation between a husband and wife, and it really made me smile. And I thought, oh,
well, right at the end.
Yeah.
Oh, I know that ending just fell into my lap. It's lovely. I was pleased with that. Occasionally, you just feel a bit snug as a writer and think that works. But there's these two characters, and we don't know. I didn't. There's a convention in these thrillers out from the old ones that actually doesn't fit our times anymore, and actually it didn't seem right to just have a couple meeting and everything just being and sailing off into the sunset or whatever might be happening. And actually I thought it'd be much better to have somebody discussing it in uncertainty, because actually we don't like things tied up that much, and real life isn't tied up that much. So I have these people anyway, not trying to give, but they're discussing what might have happened.
Exactly. And it's such a, I think it was such a typical conversation between, you know, a couple that have been together a good number of years, and it's just the essence of that captured, and it left us the readers with, wow. And you know,
it's a kind of add your own ending.
It is. And you know, and part of me wanted to ask, you know, will we ever see these people again? But if it's a standalone, I don't think
I want to go back to them particularly. It depends. Obviously, if it sells 15 million, I'll reconsider.
but honestly, I know, you know, the sense of a story going from page to screen.
Yeah.
But seriously, I mean, this would just be one of those, you know, not small screen. I think it needs a big screen. And this is just my wish. Whether the goddesses are listening, who knows? But to go to the cinema and watch this, and
well, the funny thing is, I think cinemas continued telling these stories, whereas books have stopped telling them. And cinema does big adventure in interesting places. And actually, one of the great things that happened to fiction things, actually they gave it a lot of power, was its world narrowed. A lot of the great books of the last thing are actually in quite small environments, and that adds a kind of pressure to them. But actually, I think some of us are yearning to go a bit wild and go a bit further and go out there.
Exactly.
But it has been an option. I mean, BBC Studios have got it.
Have they?
As an option, yeah. Which they see. You see, they see it as the smaller screen.
Well, I mean, hey, this is just me. I don't want to be selfish. However, it gets, you know, well, yeah, a bit like The Night Manager.
Yeah, so, I think they were thinking that sort of thing. And I was just having a conversation with one of the producers by email. I'm just saying, of course, there may be several super yachts you can hire quite cheaply at the moment for filming purposes.
I'm sure. It's like just ask the government. You wouldn't happen to have a spare one we could borrow.
But you know, I mean, hopefully, in some ways, this is, you know, I did. What happened is, I mean, I know you read the proof, but actually I changed it slightly afterwards because I wanted to make sure that there was a bit of clear what, in that very last chapter you're discussing, I have that ending just as the war in Ukraine starts, because I wanted to sort of say, well, maybe this is the end of the oligarchs. Maybe what we're seeing now, and actually puts this era into a time thing, and actually that it's no longer so easy to be that super yacht owner as it was then, and it's no longer, because we're looking at these things and we're thinking that's not cool. We're seeing all these things being tied up in harbors, and where most of us are sort of thinking, yeah, actually bloody right, they should be being confiscated. And so maybe this is about the end of an era, which I hadn't realized when I was writing it, but I kind of think it might be.
In which case, I'm going to have to get hold of the published version, because and then because I want to see how you've done that. I really do. But that off into the sunset, that is still there, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely that happens.
Yeah.
And they're still, yeah. I can't say why they have to be off into the sunset, but yeah, it's hopefully fulfills all the sort of thing that we all want to escape.
Yeah, but definitely. Now I have to ask you this, because there is a moment where we might have thought, oh, there's no police in this, but you do bring, I'm right in thinking there are police that do find their way into this, are there not?
There are. I do have a little bit of that going on, and it is a very different genre. They have to, yeah, there is a, but it's not an investigation in the same sort of way. In fact,
Yes.
there is kind of, yeah, actually there is, yeah, there's definitely, yeah, it's a different perspective. It's quite interesting trying to change your head, because when you're doing a police procedural, there's certain things you have to do. And it suddenly struck me there are certain things that I don't have to do those things, but there's other things you have to do if there's an adventure, and certainly there's other things you have to do as a romance. And one of the interesting things you do as a romance is almost the opposite. In a police procedural, you, the reader, don't know who did it, and it's a long search for that, and your detective is the person taking you on that kind of journey. On this sort of thing, especially on the romance, it's really interesting, because actually you kind of know some of the stuff that's going to happen in this book. In certain, I think by about 2/3 of the way through, you see two characters and you kind of think, oh, they're interesting. They should probably be together. And your work job is to keep them apart. So the reader knows something in that case, and you're trying to stop it coming true in a weird way. It's really interesting learning the different things of the form. And thrillers are all about the inevitable. You know that something really bad is going to happen, whereas in a detective fiction you start with
it's already happened. Yeah.
And it's just so interesting thinking about the, because I think one of the great things about being in genre writing and popular fiction writing is you're actually playing with the reader in a really interesting way, and you're saying, okay, you've got certain expectations about the way this story is going to come out. I'm going to give you these bits so you are satisfied with it, but these bits I'm not going to give you how you expect them. And I think, it's a really nice dance between reader and writer, that kind of fiction. But you have to know what the rule, once you kind of set this up as a thriller, you have to know what the rules are yourself.
Yeah.
In order just to toy with the reader and to make the reader, because the reader's making up half the book themselves, and therefore you're trying to give them the bits to make up and then take them away, say, no, it's not, I'm not going to do it like that, But it's great fun having to just think a bit through about how those rules work.
I really appreciate, the way that you explain to us, different styles, or call them different genres, and what they require, and give us that, that insight into putting together. When I've got this hat on, it needs to go like this, but now I was doing this, so I need to go like that. And it leads me probably, although I don't want it, but I am aware of, I don't want to take up too much of your time. So I'm going to leave you with this last question, if that's all right. Well, there's always two parts. What is the bit of this novel that just makes your heart sing? Okay. And what was the bit that you thought you are going to make or break this text?
Starting in the other bit is like, I think having to move the pieces around always annoys me. Having to plot, I don't enjoy plotting, and yet you really do have to plot when you come to this sort of thing. And there's always a point 3/4 of the way through where it just starts to seem so mad, and you lose faith in it, and you've got to really, really work hard to keep faith in it, because you're suddenly there in the middle of the, Caribbean, and the storm's on. You kind of think, oh, how does any of this really work? And it's sort of like just trying to keep the faith in it, because you know, it's hard work, that bit. And that was the bit that where it's actually just keeping the logic about who is on whose side at this point, you know, who, and actually, you know, some of the people change sides between first and second draft quite a lot. And it's sort of like, oh, that's how the puzzle works. But then towards the end, I wrote a book called The Birdwatcher, and it seemed to me that several things all rushed together in the end and made sense. And this book had the same excitement towards the end, where certain things you just sort of think, oh, okay, good things that happen to this person, this person, and this person. There's one person right at the end who you feel neglected by the entire book, and they suddenly appear at the end. And it was, you know, literally just like a day before handing in my final draft, I thought, oh no, something good has happened to that person. They don't have to, their story doesn't have to end on page 30 or wherever it is. There's something they have to do with the ending of this book that's quite nice. And I love that. And it's just because your brain is full of all the little strands of it, and sometimes they all tie up very nicely. Other times they just don't do it. But when that happened, that was just, you think, oh, that's great.
Yeah, I highly recommend this book. Thrillers may not be your bag, and especially if you're used to William's writing with regard to police procedural, go on, just get into the water and see where this takes you. It is well worth it. William, an utter delight to be with you. Thank you so much for coming on, and for like I say, for doing something different.
Well, thanks for such brilliant questions, and also thanks for everything. You are such a great supporter of the crime writing community and of you know, people on any stage of their journey. It's just a real pleasure to talk to you.
It is a pleasure. I think for me, other people's literary mischief keeps me out of mischief. So, so that's no bad thing whatsoever. Just wish you all the very best. Please, will you hold the cover up again for us? Wonderful, wonderful. So at the moment, it's out in hardback and it's out in Kindle as well. Yeah,
out in Kindle as well, and audiobook, and will be hopefully I think they're next summer for the paperback.
For paperback, brilliant. Okay, so William, all the very best, and look forward to when we can actually meet in person soon. Yeah,
great. All right, it'd be lovely to see you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Bye now.